Today we're talking about drug paraphernalia. Possession of drug paraphernalia is a very common charge in the state of Arizona. The statute, if you look it up, 133415, it's very long, it's very broad, and it covers a lot of very specific things as well as being broad. So what it's telling you is that there's a list of things that are totally prohibited as long as it's related to drugs. And it has a big laundry list of about 20 different items that you cannot have. The question becomes, what about those items that have a dual purpose, or what about the items that it's not really clear whether it's being used with drugs or it is actually drug paraphernalia? What about those things? What about scales or baggies or containers and all of these different things that can have a dual purpose? So it may not necessarily be for drugs, but it may be in somebody's possession and they want to classify it as drugs. Well, what then? Well, we looked at the statute, and if you look at the statute 133415E, it has a number of 14 different factors that the government, that the prosecutors, that the courts are supposed to look at to determine whether something is actually drug paraphernalia. And so we'll run through those quickly. When I was in law school, I did an example on one of these things. I did a presentation where I brought in a scale, I brought in some baggies, and I put within those baggies mock drugs. So I made some sort of fake cocaine, some fake methamphetamines, and these different drugs. And so it looked like drugs, and I presented that to the class, but it wasn't drugs. But technically, you could make an argument that the scale and the baggies and all of those things were drug paraphernalia if some of these indicia were true. So let's run through them. We're not going to spend a ton of time on each of them because there's 14 of them, but we'll run through quickly. So first of all, the first item that we want to consider is whether or not there are statements made as they relate to that item. So let's use the scale example. If the police are investigating somebody and they find a scale and the person says, hey, I used that scale to measure my cocaine, okay, that's a good indicia that that scale is going to be considered paraphernalia. Similarly, prior convictions. So if that same person had prior convictions for distribution or for sale of some sort of drugs, and they had these items around that would basically be analogous in a prior conviction would be analogous in the current situation, they may say that that is indicia that that's drug paraphernalia. Similarly, proximity to a crime. So if the scale is right next to some other legal violations, like some other presence of cocaine or some other drugs or something else happened, then that's a good indicator that it's indicia. If it's not, let's say, for example, it's in a car or it's in another bedroom, it's not close to the actual violation, so the proximity is far. That makes it less likely to be considered paraphernalia. Similarly, the proximity to the drugs. So if it is actually, you say there's some drugs on a scale, or there's drugs in a baggie, or there's something very, very close in time, there's actually drugs real close to whatever that item is, that's a good indicator that that's paraphernalia. Similarly, residue. So is there drug residue on the item? Is there drug residue on the scale or in the container? That's going to be a good indicator that that item, that container, was used as paraphernalia to transport or to do something with drugs. Evidence of intent. If there's anything that shows that the person who is being charged with the violation had some sort of intent, if there's text messages to say I was using this for something, if there's communication or conversations or admissions about that person's intent to use that item in drug sales or drug consumption or drug cultivation or whatever it is, that might be a good indicator that it's paraphernalia. The instructions on use. So this is pretty standard stuff. If there's instructions written out for somebody, you need to measure this using this scale, you need to put X amount in this container, you need to do something with that. Those are verbal or written instructions that indicate that this is to be used in a certain manner. It's to be used for some sort of illegal purpose, and so therefore it can constitute paraphernalia. Similarly, descriptive materials. So if same type of thing as the instructions, if there are some descriptions saying that this is what this is supposed to be used for, it's descriptive, it's explaining to somebody else who could potentially be using it, this is what this is for, sort of like a marketing material. Same with advertising. If the items are being used or advertised specifically for illegal drug use or for some sort of contraband, that's a good indicator that it's drug paraphernalia. If it is displayed for sale as drug paraphernalia, if it's something that is specifically marketed for marijuana or specifically marketed for cocaine or something along those lines, where somebody can take a look at that advertisement or take a look at that product being on sale and say, this is for this purpose. That's a good indicator. Finally, we got four more. If somebody's selling some drugs or some paraphernalia, something that could potentially be used as drug paraphernalia, but it also has a legitimate use. So let's say, for example, a scale, you could use it to measure a number of different things, measure your protein powder, measure your quinoa, whatever it is you're doing for your special diet. That may be a legitimate use of that item. So you want to then start to compare whether or not there's a lot of legitimate uses versus illegal uses. And so that goes into the courts and the prosecutor's factor to whether or not to determine whether or not this is actually indicia of paraphernalia or not. So if there's a legitimate reason to have that, if there's a legitimate purpose for sale, we want to look at the number of sales, how many of those sales are for legitimate purposes, how many are not. You want to look at the ratio between those two. You want to see whether there is legitimate usage in society for it. So like I said, there's food scales, there's all sorts of scales that measure grams, which you can use to do a lot for your diet. You can use it a lot for household cooking and all sorts of things. But you can also use it for drugs. But there is legitimate use for that. If there's some item where there's really no other legitimate use for that other than drugs, that's going to be a good indicator that it's paraphernalia. And finally, number 14 is whether or not expert witnesses have anything to say about it. So if the government wants to bring in an expert witness and say this person would come in and testify and say, this is what we believe this item is used for. We know that based on 1,000 different traffic stops or investigations. We know that this is popular amongst this population for the consumption of this drug or to produce this or to cultivate this, whatever. The expert witness can come in and testify about that. We can always rebut that. We can always say that's not accurate and these other indicia are more applicable. But you can see here there's a lot of different factors that go into it. So sometimes we'll get people who are just stopped. They have an empty container of something of nothing. There's nothing in there. The police will want to believe that they were transporting something illegally or they had some illegal drugs in there. But really, when we go through these number of different factors here, the government really can't check all of these off because none of them apply. It may not be close to drugs. There may not be any residue in there. Our client may not have made any statements about it. And so you have to do a very fact-intensive analysis. You need to look at the specifics of the case, run through these factors, and then make your argument about it, whether it's drug paraphernalia or not. So I hope you found this helpful. You can see it's not as black and white as some people might want to say, or as the police or the prosecutors might want to imply. And so if you've been charged with the possession of drug paraphernalia, or if you're facing any other criminal charges and you want to speak with my team about it, please give us a call. We offer free case evaluations, and we look forward to speaking with you. Thanks for watching.